Good morning, everybody. It's Mr. Sheets from Shoals again, back here on the back porch with Case and Nathan. I'm going to read you a couple books this morning real quick. I hope everybody had a good day yesterday. It's been really nice outside, so hopefully when you get your school stuff done, you can get outside and run around and do what little kids do. So the first book I want to read with permission from Scholastic is Corduroy. Corduroy is a bear who once lived in the toy department of a big store. Day after day, he waited with all the other animals and dolls for somebody to come along and take him home. The store was always filled with shoppers buying all sorts of things, but no one ever seemed to want a small bear in green overalls. Then one morning, a little girl stopped and looked straight into Corduroy's bright eyes. "Oh, Mommy," she said, "look, there's the very bear I've always wanted." "Not today, dear," her mother sighed. "I've spent too much already. Besides, he doesn't look new. He's lost the button to one of his shoulder straps." Corduroy watched them sadly as they walked away. "I didn't know I'd lost a button," he said to himself. "Tonight I'll go and see if I can find it." Late that evening, when all the shoppers had gone and the doors were shut and locked, Corduroy climbed carefully down from his shelf and began searching everywhere on the floor for his lost button. Suddenly he felt the floor moving under him. Quite by accident, he had stepped onto an escalator and up he went. Could this be a mountain, he wondered? I think I've always wanted to climb a mountain. He stepped off the escalator as it reached the next floor, and there before his eyes was a most amazing sight. Tables and chairs and lamps and sofas and rows of beds. "This must be a palace," Corduroy gasped. "I guess I've always wanted to live in a palace." He wandered around admiring the furniture. "This must be a bed," he said. "I've always wanted to sleep in a bed." And up he crawled onto a large, thick mattress. All at once he saw something small and round. "Why, here's my button," he cried, and he tried to pick it up, but like all the other buttons on the mattresses, it was tied down tight. He yanked and pulled with both paws until pop! Off came the button, and off the mattress Corduroy toppled. Bang into a tall floor lamp. Over it fell with a crash. Corduroy didn't know it, but there was someone else awake in the store. The night watchman was going his rounds on the floor above. When he heard the crash, he came dashing down the escalator. "Now who in the world did that?" he exclaimed. "Somebody must be hiding around here." He flashed his light under and over sofas and beds until he came to the biggest bed of all, and there he saw two fuzzy brown ears sticking up from under the cover. "Hello," he said. "How did you get upstairs?" The watchman tucked Corduroy under his arm and carried him down the escalator and set him on the shelf in the toy department with all the other animals and dolls. Corduroy was just waking up when the first customers came into the store in the morning, and there, looking at him with a wide, warm smile, was the same little girl he'd seen only the day before. "I'm Lisa," she said, "and you're going to be my very own bear. Last night I counted what I saved in my piggy bank, and my mother said I could bring you home." "Shall I put him in a box for you?" the sales lady asked. "Oh, no, thank you," Lisa answered, and she carried Corduroy home in her arms. She ran all the way up 4 flights of stairs into her family's apartment and straight to her own room. Corduroy blinked. There was a chair and a chest of drawers, and alongside a girl-sized bed stood a little bed just the right size for him. The room was small, nothing like that enormous palace in the department store. "This must be home," he said. "I know I've always wanted a home." Lisa sat down with Corduroy on her lap and began to sew a button on his overalls. "I like you the way you are," she said, "but you'll be more comfortable with your shoulder strap fastened." "You must be a friend," said Corduroy. "I've always wanted a friend." "Me too," said Lisa, and gave him a big hug. That's the story of Corduroy. All right, I guess y'all heard Case eating breakfast just a minute ago, so I hope we didn't interrupt him too much. But the next book I want to read is Curious George. case kind of reminds me of Curious George. He always gets in some trouble every now and then. But this is George. He lived in Africa. He was very happy, but he had one fault. He was too curious. One day George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. The man put his hat on the ground, and of course George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. He picked it up and put it on, but the hat covered George's head. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. The man with the big yellow hat put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a little stool, and the man said, "George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble." George promised to be good, but it's easy for little monkeys to forget. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy, but oh, what happened? First this, and then this. "Where is George?" The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water and almost all tired out. "Man overboard," the sailors cried as they threw him a life belt. George caught it and held on. At last he was safe on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey until at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship onto the shore and on into the city to the man's house. After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. He crawled into bed and he fell asleep at once. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What fun. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the telephone. "Hello? Hello?" they say, but there was no answer. Then they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call came from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" The firemen jumped onto the fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. "Ding dong, ding dong, everyone out of the way, hurry, hurry, hurry!" Firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. No fire, only a naughty little monkey. "Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wire, and a thin fireman caught one arm and a fat fireman caught the other. "You fooled the fire department," they said. "We will have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm." They took him away and shut him in a prison. George wanted to get out. He climbed up to the window to try the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got on the wooden bed to catch George, but the watchman was too big and heavy. The bed tipped up, the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran through the open door. He hurried through the building and out onto the roof, and then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked onto the telephone wires. Quickly and quietly over the guard's head, George walked away. He was free. Down the street, outside the prison wall, stood a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself, but instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose. In an instant, the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Up, up he sailed, higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses, and all the people like dolls. George was frightened. but he held on very tight. At first the wind blew in great gusts, then it quieted. Finally it stopped Finally it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump, onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do. Then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man with the big yellow hat. George was very happy. The man was happy too. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the balloon man for all the balloons. And then George and the man climbed into the car, and at last away they went. To the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. Alright, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll be back tomorrow with another book. Y'all have a good day. I miss you guys. Love y'all.